Good morning. My name is Ben Zong, and I'm the Online Communications Manager with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. Thank you for joining us today for one of 4 virtual briefings that we've organized ahead of tomorrow's Hydrogen Village at the State Capitol. The Hydrogen Village is the largest showcase of hydrogen and fuel cell technologies ever at the State Capitol, and it's an opportunity for us to educate policymakers in one of the world's largest economies and a leader in zero-emission mobility and environmental policies. The Hydrogen Village is a joint effort of the California Fuel Cell Partnership, California Hydrogen Coalition, California Hydrogen Business Council, the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association, and the Stationary Fuel Cell Collaborative. I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsor of the briefings, GTI, or Gas Technology Institute, and its Hydrogen Technology Center. With me today are representatives from the hydrogen and fuel cell industry who will share with us the opportunities and challenges of hydrogen mobility and energy. During the briefings, everyone will be muted. However, we will have a Q&A session at the end, and so please use the questions feature to ask questions to the panelists. Also, this session will be recorded, and so we'll post a link to that, or we'll send an email with a link to that YouTube once it's posted. And with that, we have with us today David Park from the California Fuel Cell Partnership, who will be moderating today's session on heavy-duty transportation. David?
All right, thank you, Ben. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. I'm David Park. I'm with, as Ben mentioned, I'm on the staff of the California Fuel Cell Partnership. I'm pleased to be here with our guests, Tom Mourmouras with Shell, Jerome Gregeois with Hyundai, Ryan Lau with AC Transit, and James Kast with Toyota. Before we get started, I just want to also just briefly mention to the audience that, yes, indeed, this is our Hydrogen Village virtual panel sessions today. Tomorrow, we will be doing an in-person event in Sacramento at the Capitol. If you go to our website, cafcp.org, that's California Fuel Cell Partnership, cafcp.org. Right on our homepage, you'll see a button to register for the Hydrogen Village, and that registration will give you the specifics on the in-person event tomorrow. We're very excited because we're going to have on display at that event automobiles, fueling trailers, and of course, the topic of today's conversation, heavy-duty trucks. And just to kick it off, we're seeing our heavy-duty network of heavy-duty fueling stations. The initial network seeding right now, we have 5 locations in some form of development throughout California. And we have several demonstration projects ongoing with Class 8 tractors. This is very much complementary to the light-duty market. The light-duty market kicked off in 2015, and that panel session will be this afternoon. But today, we're going to focus on heavy-duty transportation. Just a reminder that heavy-duty is not just trucks, although that is the bulk of where we see heavy-duty, but it also involves marine craft, locomotive, construction equipment, so and other heavy-duty application of energy systems that have traditionally been diesel has traditionally occupied that space based on the characteristics of that technology. I believe, and I'm just going to jump a little bit ahead and look behind the curtain, but today our panelists are going to, shed some light on how fuel cell fits into that diesel space as diesel off-ramps due to greenhouse gas issues. So with that, I'm going to jump right into the presentations. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Tom Mourmouras. Good morning, Tom. How are you?
I'm great, David. Thanks for hosting today.
Yeah, our pleasure. And so just as a brief introduction, Tom is the commercial manager for heavy-duty hydrogen at Shell, deploying infrastructure for trucks, trains, ships, and buses. Before Shell, Tom worked at mobility startups like TrueCar, Lyft, and Mucker Capital, and received degrees in economics and management. And true to the marketplace, we're going to start with Tom because I believe he will be talking about hydrogen refueling infrastructure for heavy-duty applications. Take it away, Tom.
Great. Thank you, David, for that very kind introduction, and to Ben for setting this thing up today. Really excited to be here participating in the Hydrogen Village, and big kudos to FCP, GTI, and all the different organizations looking to set this up today. I think that the more we can get our message out into the world, the more that we can share all of the exciting progress that we're making in the hydrogen industry, especially as it applies to heavy duty applications like those trucks, trains, ships, ferries, buses, and even other things coming up, aircraft. I was recently at a vertical takeoff and landing conference in Long Beach just last week, and those things are going to be guzzling a lot of hydrogen too. So as an energy guy, I'm really excited to see that. But indeed, the main focus of what we're doing now is in the Class 8 truck market. And there's a few different reasons that we can talk about why hydrogen has such great product market fit for heavy duty mobility, and why we're working hard on this. So with that, we can get started. Please don't make any investment decisions based on what you hear today. Okay, great. So just to kind of baseline, I think all of us know, but hydrogen is one of myriad what we call new fuels. So in the industry and at Shell, at our organization, we have got a fuel for everybody these days. We've got biofuels, so that really means renewable natural gas and biodiesel, hydrogen, the topic today, electric mobility, fast charging, DC fast charging, battery electric powered buses, cars, trains, trucks, and then GTL, gas to liquid, and LNG, which has been in the news, unfortunately, quite a lot. So together, all of these solutions start to put the mosaic of the future energy world. And obviously, Shell's legacy is an oil and gas company. But the company is absolutely changing and changing fast. People like me have never worked in oil and gas. I've worked in technology, digital venture capital, and hydrogen fuels. So pretty excited about this. And there's a lot happening in the company in California and here in LA, where I'm calling you from. Next slide, please. Okay, so hydrogen is a unique and special molecule because we can use it for a variety of purposes. Sometimes we call hydrogen an energy carrier or an energy vector. And what that means is that with our favorite, very versatile hydrogen molecule, we can use it in lots of different fun and cool and exciting applications. So we can use it to move heavy trucks that are pulling 80,000 pounds. We can use it to decarbonize hard to abate sectors like fertilizer, asphalt, and cement. And we can use it as an energy store for long term. When we as society move towards hydrogen, when we move towards renewables for energy, we're going to need a power store for when the sun isn't shining and when wind isn't blowing. So hydrogen in bulk quantities as an energy store is really exciting for that. So today we'll focus on heavy duty mobility. Next slide. So there are three main pathways that we can find hydrogen. First is natural gas reforming or steam methane reformation. And that is how we're getting almost all of the hydrogen today. And we can reform, or we can strip off the hydrogen off of methane coming from fossil gas or from biogas. So fossil gas is self-explanatory, it comes from the earth. And biogas is a newer application, and that means that we recover waste methane emissions from landfills, dairies, and farms and agriculture. So sometimes you'll hear this term waste to hydrogen, and waste to hydrogen can really encompass both biogas, steam methane reformation, and the next category, which is called gasification. So with gasification, we take waste feedstocks and superheat them to strip off the hydrogens, and then we're left with a non-toxic carbon char that has useful applications in things like soil hydration and playground building materials. So gasification is something I'm really excited about. There's a few cool projects that you'll be able to find without too much research online that are happening here in California, where we are going to, well, the collective we in industry are going to be taking waste feedstocks like agricultural waste and post-consumer paper waste, superheating them, shooting them with plasma, and then stripping off the hydrogens. So if you start to think about how exciting it is to use the existing supply chain of waste management companies who have got the sourcing of their inputs, i.e. people's trash, and then they bring it to a central location, and then now with this fancy new technology, I'm able to strip the hydrogen molecules off of that and use that for positive use case in society. That's super exciting. And it doesn't require as much electricity and water as the most famous new or clean energy pathway, which is called electrolysis. And with electrolysis, we take hopefully green electricity and strip the hydrogens off of water. So this process is good because we have a lot of water in the world, and we have usually a lot of electricity in some places, although not here in California, as we know. And this can be a zero carbon pathway. Gasification and bio-SMR, we can get to negative carbon pathway, which means that we're actually reducing the amount of emissions that would have been entered into the atmosphere by avoiding methane release and taking that methane release and resulting hydrogen, carbon dioxide. And even if we have some carbon dioxide, that's still less polluting than the methane that would have been emitted. And you may know that methane is about 82 or 83 times more polluting than carbon dioxide. So takeaway here is that yes, we're using mostly hydrogen from nat gas SMR today, and in the future, we have a lot of promise in these two new pathways, gasification and electrolysis, and together we start to have this sort of multi-pathway fuel in hydrogen. Next slide. So at Shell Hydrogen, we are global. This is already happening. It has been happening. And I'll draw your attention to the 3 to 4 red trucks in the bottom left corner of the screen. These are the 3 heavy-duty hydrogen refueling stations that I will talk about today. And then in addition, we are building a 4th one in Port of Sacramento that will be available in 2023 is the scheduled release. So I'll go into what we're doing with the existing sites, have a few pictures of what's already happening. We'll talk about what we're looking for in the future. Next slide. Okay, so this is the heavy-duty hydrogen refueling station network in Southern California, and this was set up with some of our partners. Toyota, James Kast is on the call with us today, and the Zanza for Zero and Near Zero Emission Freight Forwarding Project. So what you see here is a duty cycle that allows freight to be transported from the ports, Port of LA, Port of Long Beach, to Ontario, which is what you may have heard called the Inland Empire. A lot of warehousing, a lot of distribution centers happen around there. So basically you have cargo containers moving from the ports to Ontario, trucks drop off their loads there, then they can refuel in Ontario and then bring their empty boxes or bring exports back to the Port of Long Beach. So that's why there's this circle here that sometimes we call the minimum viable network for heavy duty hydrogen. And there's another use case which we are seeing a lot of interest in, which is just intense duty cycle return to base hauling from Ontario. So I'm a fleet. I want trucks to run 22, 23 hours a day like they do in diesel, just distributing from a big DC to stores or to smaller DCs, and they can run loops in Ontario. So I'm really excited about the sites here. First article sites, our newer sites will be bigger and better and badder, but I think it's really important that we get these sites out here, learn what's going on, and let's take a deep dive into them. So next slide. So here's a little bit more detail about the Zanza project that I touched on. So big thanks to our friends in the state at CEC Carb and at Port of LA, especially for helping to move this forward. Toyota on the call here, represented by my friend James Kast, and other fleets here. You'll recognize a lot of these names. So this is really exciting. We just had all 10 trucks for a big photo shoot at the site that you see here in Wilmington, about 1.5 miles from the port of LA. And there's a lot of excitement here. Fleets are really excited about what these trucks offer in quick fill times, long ranges, and high payload capacities. Next slide. Great. Here's some leaders of the project, 4 of the trucks as they would fill in. So here you'll see that you've got 2 fueling lanes. One is at 350 bar, one is at 700 bar. And definitely something interesting for discussion that we can talk about. We have some OEMs looking at 700, some looking at 350. Personally, I see us supporting both of them. There are pros and cons for each. 700 bar can get you longer range for the same volume of hydrogen that you will be storing on the truck, but 350 bar is cheaper and easier and a little bit more reliable to manufacture. So I think that there's pros and cons. I see the industry might have different use cases and different duty cycles that will apply to each pressure, but here you'll observe 2 lanes, 1 for each pressure type. Next slide. All right, now this is a cool site. So we're now in Ontario, California, and here you will see what I call a multi-fuel truck stop. So you have 17 lanes of TA Petro branded diesel. You have 3 lanes of Shell LNG and 2 lanes of hydrogen, again at 350 bar and at 700 bar. And I've highlighted in the left red box the equipment compound. And in there you'll see about 1,600 kilograms of stationary hydrogen storage, start at 500 bar, and then 2 compressors in sequence next to it, which pressure us up to 700 bar. There's a trench going from the equipment compound to the fueling lanes, and this is probably the most popular station right now because we're in the Inland Empire. We're right around all those distribution centers that we talked about, and I definitely see some opportunity for more growth here or at other sites in the Ontario, Riverside, San Bernardino area. Next slide. All right, so now let's go to Port of Long Beach, and I'm sure James might touch on this. But here we have a heavy duty site next to a light duty site in each of the red boxes. And the use case here is twofold. One, it's to fill the Class 8 trucks in the big box, so same kit and equipment as we discussed before. And those trucks will be delivering Toyota and Lexus cars, trucks, and SUVs after they are imported to Toyota Logistics Services at Port of Long Beach from their export in Nagoya, Japan. And then in the little red box, you've got a light duty fueling station that is filling Toyota Mirai hydrogen sedans upon processing from import. So Toyota is letting other OEMs and other fleets use this site, being good corporate citizens and good supporters of hydrogen as a new fuel and a new decarbonization strategy for society. And I was just here yesterday. The site was looking really good. It's a really fabulous place to visit if you're ever around and interested. Next slide. So here we can have some visualizations of the 2 duty cycles that I mentioned. Top left, you've got what look like only Toyota cars there. At least the blue one is a Mirai fuel cell car, but Toyota's also moving and moving more gasoline or gasoline electric hybrid cars to their California car dealerships. In the bottom picture is TTSI drayage container, or a TTSI fleet drayage container pulled by one of the Toyota Kenworth trucks. And I really like this picture because it shows real work that's being done here now and today in hydrogen. So this is obviously a weathered shipping container from many trans-Pacific crossings, and indeed it's going to be dropped off at its warehouse. And on the right, you have my new friend Roger Penske checking out the hydrogen fueling of the truck. Next slide. So why are we starting with trucks and why are we starting in California? You've got a lot of good policy framework that is supporting us here. Specifically the Advanced Clean Truck and Advanced Clean Fleets Transportation regulations, excuse me, that force OEMs and fleets respectively to decarbonize. So on this chart, you'll see the percent of the annual vehicle sales that must be ZEV, and then it kind of escalates starting in 2024. And then all Class 8 trucks by 2045 must be zero emissions, and by 2035, all trucks must be zero emissions if they are drayage or harbor trucks. Next slide. So Shell welcomes cooperation with all OEMs. We have Toyota and Hyundai represented on the call today, and just as with our conventional fuels, all OEMs would fill at all Shell stations. We collaborate and we invite collaboration and cooperation with all the OEMs. This doesn't work if we don't have everybody working together, and to that end, there's a lot of funding available at the federal, state, and local levels. And here I've just listed kind of the alphabet soup of programs that are helping fleets decarbonize with these trucks that still come at a little bit of a premium to conventional trucks. Next slide. So in the future at Shell, we see a need for a deployment of heavy-duty refueling stations up and down the West Coast. So big shout out to the FCP for making this map and making it available today. And if you are looking for information and have a seat and want to learn more about these fleet deployment strategies for HDHRS, I invite you to get in touch with me on email and LinkedIn. Next slide. And then just to kind of bring this all home, again, big theme for us is cooperation. So we're not trying to do this alone. Shell cannot do this on our own. And we look for the trifecta: infrastructure, OEMs, and fleets to move this forward. Thanks very much. And like I said, please feel free to email me at t.mourmouras@shell.com or find me on LinkedIn. Back to you, David.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tom. Very interesting stuff. I've seen a few questions coming in the chat. I'm just going to ask one specifically. One inquiry came in regarding production pathways. I don't know if this is your wheelhouse, but are you familiar with methane pyrolysis as a production methodology?
Yeah, I was in my head guessing that the question would be around pyrolysis, and indeed, I am familiar with it. We have an entire team that is dedicated to the supply pathways, whereas somebody like me is dedicated to the HRS, the downstream application. Pyrolysis is really exciting too. In my head and as a business person, I kind of group pyrolysis and gasification as a same bucket of a sort of waste to hydrogen pathway that I see with a lot of emphasis. So perhaps I'll add the word pyrolysis to my slide that talks about gasification. Do I have a preference or a favorite? I think at this stage, there are pros and cons of each tech, but I'm really excited about both of them. Not much to read into by my slide referencing gasification instead of pyrolysis. I think what's important is that we incorporate all of the above so that we can move away from fossil-based SMR, sooner than later. And we're going to be able to do that if we have gasification, pyrolysis, and electrolysis happening in concert. So good question.
Great, excellent. Thank you for that. And to the audience, we do have a team that works on production topics, so please feel free to reach out to the California Fuel Cell Partnership directly. Certainly can reach out to me. dpark@cafcp.org, and I can also direct you to the folks that are working on those topics. I just would like to get to the map that Tom showed. Thanks very much for presenting. We did develop our heavy-duty vision document. You can download that also on our website. And that gets to the topic of how many fuel cell stations do we need to fuel heavy-duty trucks, and how many trucks are we targeting to get on the road. And we've set a line in the sand saying we'd like to achieve 200 heavy-duty fueling stations, dispersed similar to the map that Tom presented, to service 70,000 fuel cell trucks by 2035. So that's our reach goal, and we will be working towards that. But shifting gears into the heavy duty sector, I'm going to cue Jerome. Jerome is from Hyundai. He is the Director of Commercial Vehicle Development at Hyundai Kia at the Hyundai Kia America Technical Center. He has a passion for data-driven decisions and customer-centric project management with a focus on developing zero-emission vehicles and also leveraging his skill set in product development, manufacturing, innovation, and quality management. And most importantly to us staff, he served as the board chair for the California Fuel Cell Partnership in 2021, for which we great leadership. So with that, Jerome, take it away.
Thank you, Dave, for the kind introduction. And on my screen, I see a slide from AC Transit. So if you want to switch it to my material, it will be easier for me to present that.
Apologies, Jerome. We are shifting.
No worries. Yeah, I'll. Yeah, so it was a pleasure to be chair last year, and you're in good hands with Joe Capillo this year. So a great organization to be a part of. So I see my screen today. I'll be discussing the fuel cell electric Class 8 truck program from Hyundai. As you mentioned, I work for the U.S. R&D Center, and I'm in charge of commercial vehicles. So if you want to come to the next slide. All right, so just a little bit on Hyundai. Hyundai in the U.S. is mostly known for its automobile ventures, the light-duty vehicles that are purchased, but worldwide, it's a group of 54 companies, affiliates. Those also include Kia, Genesis, and for the commercial field, a company called Hyundai Translate that he's headquartered in San Diego and does trailers for heavy-duty vehicles. Some of you may know that, but historically Hyundai started as a construction company, so this is why you see a lot of ventures still in that field. And in the U.S., there's another company that I would like to mention. It's in the other category. It's Hyundai Glovis, which is a logistics company that we'll talk a little bit about later in the presentation. So overall, worldwide presence and quite a wide array of activities. Next slide. So recently, last year, around September, Hyundai discussed its hydrogen strategy at various horizon. And at 2025, Hyundai has established a brand that's called Edge 2, obviously referring to hydrogen and also hydrogen and humanity. The aim is to have applications of hydrogen power equipment in more than just transportation, on-road transportation. So that includes ships, trains, vertical takeoff and landing or air mobility, and also some emergency generator or stationary power. And Hyundai is involved with its affiliate companies in kind of all of those different fields. If you want to go to the next slide. So the hydrogen wave that came out in late 2021 was talking about the vision for 2040. In 2040, the vision is pretty explicit. It's everyone, everything, everywhere. So basically, trying to move society towards a worldwide hydrogen society with a shift from carbon fuels. If you want to move to the next slide. So before 2040, I wanted to mention one program that has started. That was the first program outside of Asia. So for commercial vehicles, as I mentioned, Hyundai is not known in North America or basically outside of Korea or China and Asia in general, where the vehicles are commercialized. And the first venture outside of that core market was in Switzerland with a truck that is a Class 8 that we call the Exion truck. So that project started in late 2019, 2020, and this is the first kind of mass-produced hydrogen truck with the purpose of placing 1,600 vehicles in Switzerland by 2025. So to this day, we have various variants of that truck. There's a 4x2 and a 6x2. and they come in a box truck shape for the European market, and they are Class 8. So there's a first box, and eventually you can add another trailer to go to a total of 36 or 41 metric ton. 41 metric ton is about 93,000 pounds. So in this specific application, we'll go a little bit into the details, but the range is 250 miles, which is actually achieved by customers on real roads, and with a mass of hydrogen on board of 32 kilograms. So if we want to move to the next slide. So discussing about the infrastructure, obviously we cannot place vehicles if there's no available hydrogen in infrastructure to dispense that hydrogen. So specifically for the Swiss project, there's a collaboration with our partner Hydrospider, and they happen to be doing green hydrogen through electrolysis and using hydroelectricity. So you see on this picture where the dam is placed, and next to that dam, basically you have containers that are filled with hydrogen. Those containers are getting shipped to the local stations themselves, supporting the excipient. In this specific application, the requirement from our of 250 miles, and the requirement also from the hydrogen infrastructure provider, was going for 350 bar. So this is the pressure at which we operate in Switzerland. That's not the pressure we operate in all our applications. But in that setup, we were able to refuel the trucks in about 8 minutes, and getting close to the 5 minutes for an equivalent diesel truck. Another important feature is this electrolysis and setup is made possible in Switzerland because of the fiscal structure of the country that has a fairly high tax on people operating diesels for commercial vehicles. So this was the incentive to start in that market. Next slide. So you've seen that, but I had to mention this map as we are talking about infrastructure. As it was mentioned, the idea or the vision for what could the West Coast look like, and California specifically, would be about 200 stations, and that would be able to serve a fleet of around 70,000 Class 8 trucks. So if you flip through that document, the vision for the trucks, you'll be able to kind of see more details in possible routes and clusters, and how the network could expand in California and beyond. Next slide. So a little closer to us for the application, in 2023, next year, and they will be deploying trucks in the U.S. In a program that's called the NorCal Zero. This is a program that was made possible thanks to ARB and CC and other participants that helped with the financial setup. It's a project that is managed by CTE, and some of the operation teams involve Hyundai, who will be providing the trucks. Glovis, which I mentioned earlier in our conversation, who's a logistics fleet and will be operating the trucks. And for this specific project, there will be a station built at the Port of Oakland by First Element Fuel that will be supporting the project. The deployment, initial deployment, is for 30 trucks to be deployed in 2023. Next slide. So for those trucks in the US, the setup and the architecture is a little different than Switzerland. We'll have tractors, obviously, and there will be 6x4, whereas we have 6x2 or 4x2 in the European market. The power plant is fairly similar. We use 2 fuel cell systems that are coming from or a derivative of the light-duty application that we have in our Hyundai Nexo. The pressure at which we refuel for this truck is 700 bar. We have one receptacle, and we're leveraging light-duty protocol for this application, and that gets us a range of in between 400 to 500 miles, depending on the duty cycle and the payload. I'll have a slide that discusses a little more of the architecture, but we have a central motor with 350 kilowatt peak power, and it's operated through a 6-speed automatic transmission. So if we move to the next slide. As far as the way the truck is set up, as I mentioned, we have two fuel cell systems that are in front of the vehicle, one under the cabin, another one under the hydrogen storage. And as you continue through the center of the section, you can see the motor, the transmission, the drive shaft going to the two drive axles that we have in the back for the 6x4. We happen to have a battery on board also. That's a 73 kilowatt hour battery that's acting as a buffer for rigid braking, for instance, but also as a support for peak power demand. And then we place all the auxiliary components, including anything that's necessary for cooling the various equipments. Next slide. And this is my conclusion slide. So this is the truck that we're operating currently in the U.S. in front of one of our buildings in Chino, California, fairly close to the Ontario station that Tom mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerome. Really interesting stuff that's going on at Hyundai, and really encouraging. One question, I'm just going to ask you one question. I know there's several in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to get to those in Q&A. But one question regarding first responders and fire truck applications. Is Hyundai working on developing any technologies related to fuel cell in that space?
So Hyundai has been presenting some concepts for kind of rescue equipment, and I'm not very familiar with the latest status of that project, but this is something I think that we introduced maybe in 2020 or 2019 as a fairly versatile rescue equipment capable of going into complicated terrain to operate. And so Hyundai is working on that. As far as applications that would be looking more conventional as a derivative to Class 8 trucks, at this moment for the U.S. market, we were not really involved in this, but I would have to kind of double check for Korea, where the array of applications that Hyundai places on the market is kind of wide. But there's not a lot of reasons to think that it would be difficult to actually do that. In our European application, there is a power takeoff. So those trucks are refrigerated trucks, and the boxes are refrigerated through power taken from the main fuel cell. So if we had to power equipment to operate pumps or ladders or any other equipment on a large vehicle, I think that would be feasible. But as far as a commercial application, I'm not sure that it's quite near term.
Yeah, well, that's great information. Thank you for sharing that. I know that that's a particularly difficult application to electrify using battery electric technologies, just due to the demands on the power supply. So thank you for that, and Thank you for the presentation. I'm going to cue Ryan. Ryan, good morning and welcome. For the audience, Ryan Lau is with AC Transit. He joined AC Transit in 2018, where he served as a lead on zero emission policy and regulation for the Department of Legislative Affairs and Community Relations. He helps coordinate the efforts of the agency's various departments along with external stakeholders to ensure that zero emission bus funding programs and regulations meet the needs of public transit. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, David. Appreciate the introduction. Good morning. My name is Ryan Lau, External Affairs Representative with the Alameda Contra Costa Transit District, or AC Transit for short. Next slide, please. AC Transit is the largest bus-only public transit agency in the state of California. We're based in the San Francisco East Bay, and was formed in 1960, taking over from the 100-year-old Key system. AC Transit provides transit service for 1.5 million East Bay residents that populate our 364 square mile service area. And we operate a fleet of 640 buses supported by 7 facilities with a workforce of over 2,200 employees. We provide lifeline service to our riders who are 65% low income, 75% people of color, and 43% being fully transit dependent with no access to a working vehicle. Next slide, please. We've been a leader in zero emission technology since the year 2000 and have successfully designed and implemented one of the nation's most comprehensive zero emission programs. We started with hydrogen fuel cell technology during a demonstration project and have since expanded to include battery electric buses. During the demonstration project, we logged over 3.2 million zero emission miles, and it exceeded many of the performance targets established by the Federal Transit Administration and Department of Energy. One of our fuel cells has actually operated for more than 35,000 hours. Next slide, please. We've accomplished a lot in the last 20 plus years, but we're not just resting on our laurels. In June of 2020, the AC Transit Board of Directors adopted our zero emission bus rollout plan that guides the transition of our fleet to 100% zero emission by 2040. It prioritizes zero emission deployments in disadvantaged communities per our Clean Corridors plan. And the plan identifies the need for a mixed fleet to provide resiliency, and also provides an overview of the required infrastructure upgrades and workforce training. Next slide, please. And since we've been in the zero emission space for as long as we have, we wanted to take all of our past experience and lessons learned and package them up into something that really benefited the industry. And that's our zero emission transit bus technology analysis. So we have the industry's most diverse fleet of bus propulsion systems, consisting of traditional or conventional diesel hybrid, fuel cell electric, battery electric, and legacy fuel cell technologies. We're utilizing 5 buses of each type in this technology analysis, and the analysis is the first ever true side-by-side evaluation of zero emission bus technologies operated by the same agency in the same service environment with zero emission buses from the same manufacturer. The report details the comparisons of the technology's performance, reliability, fuel efficiency, capital and operating costs, and workforce development needs. And it effectively serves as a roadmap for agencies that are just getting their zero emission programs off the ground. So we have 25 buses that are in the study, but we currently operate 26 zero emission buses, 19 of which are fuel cell and 7 are battery electric. And additionally, we'll be deploying an additional 21 battery electric and 20 fuel cells by the close of 2022, bringing our full count to 67 zero emission buses in service. Next slide, please. AC Transit operates zero emission buses out of 2 facilities, our Emeryville division and our Oakland division. And at our Oakland division, we operate both zero emission technologies side by side, which is where we used that division to do the technology analysis. And we've recently expanded our hydrogen fueling capacity for up to 78 buses between the 2 divisions. And we secured funding to expand our Oakland division's fueling capacity by 6-fold, and are currently seeking funding for a hydrogen infrastructure project in our Hayward division to expand zero emission coverage to the southern portion of our service area. Next slide, please. So I've spoken a lot about our zero emission program, but I wanted to cover some things that we'll need in order to successfully get to the finish line of 100% zero emission by 2040. So the Air Resources Board has a regulation called the Innovative Clean Transit Regulation, which provides a great goalpost for public transit, but it's an unfunded mandate. And we anticipate the cost of our full fleet transition upwards of $1.1 billion. So funding will be a significant need moving forward. And as part of that funding landscape, HVIP is an important program to build the heavy-duty zero-emission vehicle market. But there are challenges, particularly for public transit fleets. The first-come, first-served nature of the program makes it difficult for public transit agencies to compete with private sector fleets because of the complicated procurement processes for public transit agencies. So to resolve that, we work closely with the California Transit Association and the California Air Resources Board to create a $70 million set aside for public transit. Additionally, zero-emission deployments are not like diesel deployments. Due to the significant upfront costs and evolving technologies, they're usually composed of smaller incremental deployments where infrastructure and vehicles must be deployed concurrently. It makes it difficult when different agencies are coordinating the administration of vehicle incentives and infrastructure incentives separately. Also, the cost of maintenance of a zero-emission vehicle is more expensive than maintaining a diesel bus, as is the cost of fuel. And at first glance, the cost of hydrogen is nearly double that of diesel, but thankfully there are credits that significantly decrease the cost of hydrogen fuel, which highlights the significant role of state incentives to build the market, and scale will be important to bring those costs down. Additionally, it's very different working on a zero-emission vehicle than it is a diesel bus, and requires a different skill set. And so trained and skilled zero-emission mechanics are not readily available in the job market. And to address this, we have an $18 million state-of-the-art advanced learning lab planned to build that workforce. Next slide, please. So in wrapping, all of this technology is great, but why is it important? AC Transit, for AC Transit, the technology value is not really in and of itself, but rather the benefit it provides to the community. And as I mentioned before, our Clean Corridors plan dictates that we prioritize deployments of zero-emission vehicles in our disadvantaged communities. The results are direct to these communities by removing the PM air pollution of the buses that operate in their communities all day long. And the efforts align directly with the federal government Justice 40 initiatives. And just in closing, we feel like the climate benefits are significant. We estimate that we've eliminated 13,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions through our zero emission program and are ramping up deployments significantly to meet our obligations under the Innovative Clean Transit Regulation. We're proud of our accomplishments at AC Transit and our contributions to the industry. We look forward to realizing the promise of full zero emission. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Very much appreciate that. And certainly fuel cell buses or hydrogen and fuel cell applications in the transit industry cannot be understated. Just regarding your service territory, is it more urban or more suburban, or are you doing longer kind of intercity routes? Can you describe your service territory a little bit?
Yeah, we do sort of all of the above, actually. So we have, big urban centers like Oakland, that are really dense, and we serve a lot of people there. Ridership's pretty high there. And then we have more suburban areas like Hayward and Fremont, where it's a little bit more sparse. And we actually piloted a type of service that's sort of a mix between fixed route and on-demand, called Flex service, in order to sort of see how we can operate in suburban environments. And then we have the sort of interesting topography of the hills, which is difficult to navigate, so we typically operate smaller vehicles there. So it's really a mix. It's really all of the above.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I imagine that regarding duty cycle, you may be applying different drivetrains, batteries versus fuel cells versus hybrids, different routes. So thank you. And just for the sake of time, we do have to move on to our last speaker. Last but not least, James Kast with Toyota. James, are you there? There you are. Good morning, James. James is a hydrogen infrastructure manager at Toyota. whose goal is to expand a reliable fueling network for both light-duty and heavy-duty fuel cell electric vehicle customers. With that, James, please go ahead and take it away.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Dave. And I know we're a little short on time. Want to make sure we get some questions. So let's go ahead and jump right into the first slide, please. All right, so just really setting the context a bit of the why. And of course, internally, we have this strong beacon of light, which comes from our Environmental 2050 Challenge, which eventually is removing and reducing all of our CO2 footprint and our overall harmony with nature as well. So you see here, it's not just what the vehicle emits itself, but how we produce it and recycle it, and also our water use as well within the entire ecosystem. So all of this, of course, drives us to this portfolio approach, namely using our hybrids, but eventually battery and full zero emission fuel cell electric vehicles as well. Next slide, please. But another big piece of this is externally. And I think Tom and others have alluded to this, but there's such a huge need just for the local air pollution, of course, climate change broadly, that it's now turned into these policies that really drive both manufacturers to produce cleaner vehicles and to the fleets to adopt them. And I think you're seeing with the number of states going more zero emission goals by those 16 and now 17 MOU states following the Nevada announcement yesterday, that there is a strong policy push both in the requirements, but also in the incentive space to make these a reality. Let's go next slide. So now getting a bit to the product side, which of course I know is the focus of my presentation today. And really the key metric here is it does take time, right? You see those initial prototypes, first one unveiled in 2016-17 timeframe, was really kind of a Franken truck, as we like to call it. We actually took and disassembled two of our Mirai to take two of those fuel cell stacks and prove out the modularity that indeed we could actually move a Class 8 80,000 pound truck down the road. And once we had that proof of concept, it was time to go to those next phases, which Tom, of course, talked quite a bit about the program there with those 10 trucks, which we call the Ocean trucks. And those have been a very strong partnership with Kenworth starting maybe mid of last year with many of those on the road. And now all 10 of them have been in their service for differing amounts of time as part of that program supported by CARB and CEC. But now let's go to the next step. So there are still demonstration units that were not for commercial use, but they were with our commercial partners, namely UPS, GTSI, and a few others. But how do you get forward to a production commercial scale? And that's where utilizing our Generation 2 fuel cell technology that is in the current Mirai, partnering with both Hino and with Kenworth to push towards that production intent and really get to larger scales on the road. Let's go next, please. And here I just wanted to showcase, again, these are demonstration trucks, but they are doing very real work. In fact, we put on about 50,000 total miles between all the trucks, both internal demonstration and in real world service. And this is just one example of the car carrier fleet. So this is our internal fleet actually moving both Toyota and Lexus vehicles to the local dealerships here in Los Angeles area. But there's been, of course, many drayage containers that have been moved and also parts and other distribution pieces with these trucks all the way up to 80,000 pounds. And the last piece I'll just note technically, again, we note that there's about at least 300 miles, and that's very conservative, noting that there is such a huge range in how much cargo and what kind of duty cycle. But even those very difficult duty cycles, namely for drayage at high cargo, you could still get 300 miles even with these initial vehicle prototypes. Let's go to the next slide, please. So again, kind of getting on that theme of commercialization, we did announce late last year our internal Toyota side of the powertrain to actually assemble the fuel cell powertrain kits here in US soil. And this is actually at our largest global manufacturing plant at Toyota Motor Manufacturing, Kentucky, there in Georgetown. And that's where we're intending to start having this capability ready by the 2023 timeframe to then integrate with multiple OEM partners, which I already noted before. But also during that time last year, it's not just the Kenworth trucks that are on the road, but our first Hino truck prototype Class 8 has also been unveiled and starting its initial discussions and demonstration pilots as well. Next slide, please. I'm not going to talk too much about infrastructure. I know Tom hit that one out of the park today, but did want to note that it takes time even to get to where we were. So this is actually not one of the Shell stations, but one now almost 7 years ago where we put in more light duty equipment down at our port facility where many of the vehicles arrive to even enable these initial truck fills. So while the trucks are great and shiny and we love to bring them around, and of course that's a lot of people are excited about, it's still that infrastructure in the background that is so needed and necessary to eventually develop this technology and ultimately lead to its success to have a broad fueling network. Next, please. I also want to mention the renewability and the different pathways of hydrogen, which I think Tom also talked to quite well. And here we'll actually be adding our own system, also at that same facility in the port that we named Trigen. And that's because it takes a renewable renewable natural gas pathway, biogas, creates 3 useful products, which is renewable hydrogen, renewable electricity, and renewable hot water. And all 3 of those things will actually make our facility there based on 100% renewable power. And all the trucks will be fueled with that hydrogen, and even all of the Mirai that come off of the ship from Japan fueled with 100% renewable hydrogen before they go to our dealership. So again, it showcases this full ecosystem of how you can create this one power plant on site and create 100% renewable location. Next slide. I do also want to talk about scale just a little bit briefly. And if you take a really short example of about 16,000 trucks within the ports of LA and Long Beach, just given the use that those trucks have of hydrogens, maybe 40 times or so per day, that would equivalent to having essentially 600,000 vehicles, light duty vehicles on the road. So when you really think about the order of scale and magnitude, what level of infrastructure is required and how well you can get to those higher scales to reduce cost, I think is a really key point here for the trucks and heavy duty driving that infrastructure development, and eventually this synergy with light duty, which I'll touch on in just a second. Next slide, please. I also wanted to highlight the collaborative nature, which I think has been discussed in this industry, and you see actually half the different names here on this panel today. And the intent, again, is all stations and all trucks are compatible and able to fuel at any one network. So here the goal, just like light duty, was to create the hardware and the fueling protocols that are standardized both nationally and globally, so that you can have this fast, safe, reliable fueling and trying to achieve that 10, 15-minute fueling times that these diesel truck operators expect. Next slide. Just my last couple of slides here, and again, this is just hitting home that synergy between light duty, heavy duty, because the scales are different. On the manufacturing side of the vehicle, light duty is just much larger by an order or two of magnitude, and that is what really helps drive some of those component costs that you see eventually leading to trucks and other applications as well. But for the fueling side, again, I already noted this, that scale factor of how much use of hydrogen is what drives the same synergy and cost reduction on the infrastructure side. So these two really do work very nicely together, where it's not one or the other, but both of them benefit from scaling together. Then I believe my last slide, if you would, Ben. Yes, here again, just noting there's so much you could do with fuel cells. And although Toyota has a strong focus on light duty vehicles, at least previously, how we can bring this unique modular technology to things you see here, from medium duty, stationary, buses, marine, you name it. We're looking at ways to help decarbonize using our technology. And with that, I'll kick it back to you, Dave. Thanks so much.
Yeah, James, thanks so much for that closing presentation. That really brings a lot of these topics together. Based on your background, it sounds like you're working on both light duty and heavy duty infrastructure topics. And with that depth of knowledge regarding that space, what are your thoughts regarding light duty versus heavy duty infrastructure? And I'll predicate that by saying that to date, a majority of the funding for light duty infrastructure has been state funded, and we're seeing that funding kind of shift to private sector now, where more private sector funds are coming into the development of that space. But can you just explain the interconnect between light duty and heavy duty infrastructure?
Sure, yeah, I could touch on that a bit. And I think the first reasoning for what you just touched on is a little bit of just the predictability, right? We now have vehicles that have been sold commercially for 7 years, and we also have these longer term policies, namely like the LCFS and the HRI credits, that folks can actually bank on these things as part of their business case. It's not just looking for each year, maybe there's a public grant that helps your CapEx, but these other things really help enable that long-term investment. So that's why you see like an announcement from Chevron and others, noting this more private investment into stations. But I think the interplay is also really interesting, because again, you can build a hydrogen plant to produce new renewable hydrogen in an area. It doesn't just have to go to one or the other. You can actually use that distribution scale, kind of commingling the two. And you can also envision like these truck stop models where connectors and destination stations today are a big challenge for light duty. And maybe most heavy duty stations are not in the Grace light duty station, but it's for a way to go throughout the state and eventually, cross nationally, leveraging those sites and adding definitely a separate dedicated area for light duty fueling, not sharing, the same stanches necessarily, as a way to really capture that synergy even directly from an infrastructure level, both supply chain and then eventually to the fueling side.
Great, thank you for that, and thank you for the presentations. We are probably going to go, well, we are going to go a little bit over just so that we can get to the questions that are coming in. But I'm going to ask that all the speakers turn on their cameras, and let's go ahead and address some of these questions. I see one question here. Well, actually, just going along that theme of LCFS and hydrogen. I'm going to throw this out to the entire panel. What is the state of LCFS credits? One of the person asking the question is, it appears that there's a 1,200 kilogram cap on LCFS currently. Where does LCFS fit into heavy duty hydrogen?
Tom, you want to give it a shot, or I could certainly chime in as well.
Yeah, thanks, James. I'll give it a shot, then hand the mic to you. LCFS is critical. The reason that we've started in this industry in California is because the LCFS is in California. It's the reason that we'll move up the West Coast, and indeed will follow deployments of infrastructure where the LCFS goes, because hydrogen is still an expensive fuel, as a few folks have noted today. And to make the business model work, we are still reliant on subsidy funding like LCFS and HRI for that matter. James, anything to add?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add that there is, I think it's still a strong need on the heavy duty side to again build stations large enough initially, even if you don't know if the demand is there right away. So there have also been similar proposals building from what we did in light duty into the heavy duty space to incentivize that higher capacity. But of course, the balance is how much unused capacity do you incentivize? And I think there's a lot of interesting ideas there to be most effective.
Yeah, the heavy duty hydrogen refueling infrastructure pathway that will, beef things up to heavy duty spec, I think will be really important. And yeah, the unintended consequence of incentivization of underused capacity was kind of unusual and an interesting economic study there. But I see this capacity getting used in heavy sites.
Great, thank you.
And I'll just jump in too. So from a fleet perspective, I think it's critical. LCFS credits are really the only way to make operating hydrogen really cost effective. And actually in our technology analysis, because of LCFS credits, the cost per mile actually was brought down to below the cost per mile for diesel, which is interesting.
That's great. That's great feedback, Ryan. Thank you. And I would say it makes it cost effective now, and our goal is to get to economies of scale and bring the price of hydrogen down. And certainly, LCFS is designed as that bridge to help with the economics of this new energy market. Thank you for that. Ryan, just to continue on the thread of transit, the question coming is, can you speak to some of the challenges that you've had transitioning to zero emission buses? Have you had difficulty meeting hydrogen fueling needs on schedule with buses if a station has problems and other infrastructure challenges?
I do know, we've had to deal with force majeures before, which are sort of problematic for us. Thankfully, at the time, it was when we had a relatively small deployment, and so we could still operate the service. That's actually one of the reasons why we're going with a mixed fleet. For resiliency purposes, if there is a force majeure, we have to be able to rely on some vehicles being operational, and vice versa. We have public safety power shutoffs in Northern California during fire season, and so we have to be able to rely on hydrogen in order to sort of pick up that slack. So we deal with those sorts of things, and when you're looking at a fully zero emission fleet, you have to have some kind of backup. So
great, thank you for that, Ryan. One question to James and Jerome. What percentage of trucking in California is currently using hydrogen, and what are the goals for the future?
Jerome, please, I'll add on.
Yeah, so I haven't calculated the percentage, but it's a very, very low, as it would be, I think, for battery electric, as we're in the very early stages. So there's probably a few hundred trucks, I think, in that are fully zero emission in between fuel cell and battery. So not sure what that percentage is, but I think as far as what the goals are and where it can go. Fuel cell trucks provide a good solution if you want to have zero emission in conditions where you have a high utilization, so 2 shifts or maybe more than that, or in situations where you cannot have your own dedicated infrastructure at your location, and you want to share more of a public infrastructure. So it's a model that is much closer to what you would do with a fossil fuel, that it would be diesel or other fossil fuel, as far as your operation. So there's, I think, less disruption with hydrogen than there would be with an alternative with battery, especially if you have high utilization and restrained real estate. I'd like to see that percentage of market share be as high as possible, but we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, no, all good points, Jerome. And I think indeed there's maybe, in the low tens, if 20 perhaps, of fuel cell. I know we've got about 15 total, all in different stages of development and operation. But agreed, it's really that voice of the customer, right? A lot of feedback we're hearing is if they could, if there was the right incentives today for fuel cell and there's the infrastructure, that would meet almost all of their needs, right? So a lot of the fleets would have to take a step back and plan differently to use battery buses, but they can't work. But that above all solution, not just the average requirement, is where the fuel cell comes into play.
Great. Are you seeing inquiries coming in regarding fuel cell truck sales?
Yeah, as far as wanting to get their hands on them, wanting to do demonstrations. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of hand raisers that are very much in the learn more, but want to see it work. These are not folks that just buy a truck because it meets their environmental needs. It also has to meet their logistical and their business needs too.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. And Jerome, just following up on the Oakland project, the question coming in is, where is the hydrogen coming from for the Port of Oakland project? And let's see, hold on. Oh, what's the carbon content of the hydrogen being supplied to that project? Are you able to address any of those questions?
So I guess I can provide the beginning of an answer. The station will be built by First Element Fuel, who will be providing the full supply for that. I don't have in mind all the details as far as the exact supply chain and carbon content, but the aim is to be it's called NorCal Zero, right, as a project. So that gives you kind of an idea, but I wouldn't want to provide, I think, answers where I may not have all the details there, and other folks maybe from First Element would be in a better position to answer.
Sure. Great. Thank you for that. And then I think this is going to be our last question, but it's going to be directed to Tom. Tom, regarding the architecture of heavy-duty stations, the question coming in is, it's a rather dense question, so I'm going to simplify it a little bit. But can you talk to the architecture of current heavy-duty stations relative to light-duty stations?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the key thing to remember is that we have a lot of similarities in our equipment vendor selection process, and obviously the molecule itself is the same. It might be pressured a little bit lower at 350 for bus and certain truck OEM perspectives. The capacity that we need to have on site for a heavy duty station is more than the capacity that we need to have on site for a light duty station. The amount of compression that you need to have on a heavy site exceeds that of a light site. The real estate requirement is bigger. You need to have the ingress and egress accounted for both the Class 8 trucks and their trailers, and the high capacity tube trailers that move hydrogen supply in when we don't have a pipeline. In the industry, we call that bulk vehicle routing, and that is agnostic to the molecule that's actually powering the truck, but it's just something that we have to always be looking at for safe operation. If we want to do combined stations, we need to think about separating the light side from the heavy side so that we don't have any incidents that we don't want to have. And for some of these reasons of the increased capacity and throughput of molecules of the heavy site, it's a little bit trickier today to build the heavy sites because everything's bigger on a higher scale. And the customer, the audience is a little bit different too. So, oftentimes you're dealing with a, enterprise fleet of Class 8 at some of the biggest brands in the United States, biggest companies, I should actually say. So if there is a interruption to service, that is, real dollars usually measured in, millions, tens of millions, whatever the case may be of disruption, versus if we have disruption service to a light duty retail customer, that's still bad, but it's not business being done. And in purely economic terms, the amount of economic loss or economic destruction would be smaller. So I kind of see the heavy duty sites as a little bit higher stakes from the enterprise value perspective and as requiring a more robust kit and equipment. And so, to that end, we are working hard with our network of suppliers to make more reliable, bigger, more robust, higher capacity stations for the heavy trucks.
Thank you, Tom. And I'll just throw it out there. Any final words from the panelists? And it's fine if you don't have any words, but anything you'd like to add based on the conversation? All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being available. Thanks for the scheduling, and to the audience, thanks very much for attending. I did put my email address in the group question and answer box. Please feel free to reach out to me, dpark@cafcp.org. If we did not get to your question, and I'll get your questions to the appropriate individual. As you can see, the schedule for the remainder of the day, we have our light duty transportation panel at 1:30, and then our hydrogen production panel at 3 p.m. today. And then, of course, tomorrow we have our in-person events at the state capitol in Sacramento. Please register for that at cafcp.org if you'd like to join us. So thanks very much, everyone, and thank you, panelists. Very much appreciate your time.